The Battle of Kursk, the turning tide of World War II. In the heat of the summer of 1943, amidst the relentless din of artillery, the drone of engines, and the screams of the wounded, the Battle of Kursk unfolded an epic clash that would become one of the most decisive and brutal engagements of World War II and the Great Patriotic War. Lasting from July to August 1943, this monumental confrontation is commemorated in Russia as a day of military glory on August 23, marking the day when Soviet forces achieved a decisive victory over the German Wehrmacht in what would be remembered as a pivotal turning point in the war. The three pillars of victory. The Battle of Kursk was not a single encounter but a series of interconnected operations that tested the mettle of both armies across a vast and unforgiving landscape. The battle can be divided into three major strategic operations: the Kursk Defensive, July 5–12, the Oryol Offensive, July 12–August 18, and the Belgorod-Kharkov Offensive, August 3–23. These operations were a titanic struggle of wills, involving nearly 3 million soldiers, thousands of tanks and aircraft, and some of the most brilliant and ruthless commanders the war had seen. For 50 grueling days, over a relatively narrow front of 600 kilometers and a depth of 150 kilometers, two mighty armies clashed in a contest that would decide the fate of millions. The Soviet forces, commanded by Marshal Konstantin Rokossovsky, Marshal Ivan Konev, General Nikolai Vachidin, and Marshal Georgy Zhukov, faced off against the seasoned German commanders Field Marshal Erich von Manstein, Field Marshal Günther von Kluge, Colonel General Hermann Hoth, and General Werner Kempf. As we reflect on this monumental battle, we are reminded of the extraordinary courage, strategic brilliance, and unyielding spirit that characterized the soldiers on both sides. The Battle of Kursk was not just a clash of armies, it was a clash of ideologies, strategies, and the very future of Europe. Nazi Germany's grand design. By the spring of 1943, Nazi Germany, reeling from the devastating defeat at Stalingrad, sought to regain the initiative on the Eastern Front. The German High Command, under the cold and calculated direction of Adolf Hitler, devised a plan to deliver a decisive blow to the Soviet Union. Through a process of total mobilization, they replenished their ranks, bolstered their industrial output, and readied their most formidable new weapons, the Panther and Tiger tanks, alongside a fearsome array of artillery, mortars, and aircraft. The plan, codenamed Operation Citadel, called for a double pincer attack from the north, near Oryol, and the south, near Belgorod, aimed at encircling and annihilating the Soviet Central and Voronezh fronts at Kursk. However, the Soviets were not idle during this time. From March 1943, Soviet intelligence had been monitoring German movements, and by April, it was clear that the Germans intended to strike at Kursk. The Soviet High Command made a crucial decision: instead of launching a preemptive strike, they would allow the Germans to attack first, luring them into a trap where their strength could be systematically worn down. The Soviets then planned to launch a counter-offensive that would shatter the German forces and turn the tide of the war. The Soviet strategy, a fortress of steel. From March 1943 onwards, the Soviet forces began to transform the Kursk salient into an impregnable fortress. The defensive line stretched over 100 kilometers, with thousands of kilometers of trenches, countless strongpoints, and a newly constructed railway to ensure the steady flow of troops, equipment, and ammunition. This meticulously prepared defense was designed to absorb and blunt the German offensive, paving the way for a devastating counterattack. The battlefield of Kursk was a showcase of military technology, particularly in the realm of armored warfare. The Soviet T-34, renowned for its blend of mobility, firepower, and reliability, formed the backbone of the Red Army's armored forces. Alongside the T-34 were the heavy Kilovolt 1 and Kilovolt 1S tanks, as well as the lighter T-70S, all poised to take on the might of the German Panther and Tiger tanks. The Germans also fielded their formidable self-propelled guns, including the infamous Elephant, also known as Ferdinand. The Soviet artillery, though formidable, struggled against the thick armor of the German tanks. However, Soviet ingenuity and resolve found other means of countering the enemy's technological advantage, utilizing mines and airstrikes to devastating effect. The Illinois II fighter bombers, known as the Flying Tank, played a crucial role in destroying German tanks, and Soviet air superiority was maintained throughout the battle, thanks in part to the heroics of pilots like Ivan Kochedub and Alexander Gorovets. The armies at war. The German forces, numbering 900,000 men, with 10,000 guns and 2,700 tanks, were poised to unleash destruction on the Soviet lines. Opposing them were 1,336,000 Soviet soldiers, with a staggering 19,100 guns, 3,444 tanks, and 2,172 aircraft. In reserve, deep within the steppe military district, later known as the Steppe Front, lay an additional 573,000 men, 7,401 guns, and 1,550 tanks, ready to reinforce the front lines. 6 air armies participated in the battle, with the Central, Voronezh, and Southwestern fronts playing key roles in the defensive phase, and the Bryansk, Western, and Steppe fronts joining the offensive. Operation Citadel begins. On July 5, 1943, the Germans launched Operation Citadel. However, thanks to Soviet intelligence, the Red Army was prepared. As dawn broke, the battlefield erupted in a storm of artillery fire as Soviet guns preemptively pounded the German lines. The German advance, delayed by several hours, began under a deluge of Soviet firepower. Despite fierce resistance and heavy casualties, the Germans managed to penetrate the Soviet defenses 10 to 12 kilometers on the northern face and up to 35 kilometers on the southern face of the Kursk salient. However, each gain came at a terrible cost, with Soviet forces inflicting massive losses on the advancing Germans. One of the most brutal engagements occurred around the Ponry station on the northern salient. Here, Soviet soldiers displayed unmatched bravery, holding their ground against repeated German assaults. Captain G. Ijishev's artillery battery near Samodurivka, for example, repelled multiple German attacks between July 6 and 8, destroying 19 German tanks in close-quarters combat. In just a few days, the Germans lost 50,000 men and 400 tanks on the northern front alone. Their advance was halted, and the battle's momentum began to shift. Prokhorovka, the climax of the southern front. On the southern face of the Kursk salient, the Germans concentrated their efforts around Prokhorovka, deploying up to 700 tanks and assault guns, supported by waves of aircraft. The Soviet command, anticipating this move, reinforced the Voronezh front with reserves, including the 5th Guards Tank Army. On July 12, one of the greatest tank battles in history erupted near Prokhorovka, involving up to 1,200 tanks and self-propelled guns from both sides. The battle at Prokhorovka was a chaotic, close-quarters fight, with tanks engaging at point-blank range. The Soviet T-34s, with their 76mm guns, were forced to get in close to the German Tigers and Ferdinands, whose 88mm guns could destroy a T-34 from over 2 kilometers away. The carnage was immense. The Soviet forces lost 500 tanks out of 800, while the Germans lost 300 out of 400. Despite these staggering losses, the Soviet forces managed to halt the German advance. By July 16, the Germans, unable to sustain their offensive, began retreating to their original positions. The Battle of Kursk, particularly the engagement at Prokhorovka, highlighted the indomitable spirit of the Soviet soldiers. Over 100,000 Soviet soldiers, officers, and generals were decorated for their valor, with 231 receiving the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. The battle marked the end of Nazi Germany's ability to launch major offensives on the Eastern Front, as the strategic initiative shifted irrevocably to the Soviet Union. The Soviet counter-offensive, crushing the Wehrmacht. The Soviet counter-offensive, meticulously planned by the Central and Belarusian fronts under the command of Marshals Zhukov and Rokossovsky, was the final act in the Battle of Kursk. This counter-offensive was divided into 2 major operations, the Oryol Offensive Operation, Operation Kutuzov, and the Belgorod-Kharkov Offensive Operation, Operation Rumyantsev. During the first phase, Soviet forces, having repelled the German attack, launched counterstrikes that leveraged their superiority in tanks, artillery, and air power. Despite heavy losses, the Soviet troops broke through the German lines, liberating vast swathes of occupied territory, including the cities of Oryol, Belgorod, and Kharkov. The Wehrmacht, exhausted and decimated, lost over 500,000 men, more than 1,500 tanks, 3,000 guns, and 3,700 aircraft. German tank divisions, which had spearheaded the offensive, were shattered. Of the 20 tank and motorized divisions involved, 7 were destroyed, and the rest were severely depleted. General Heinz Guderian, one of Germany's foremost tank commanders, lamented the defeat, recognizing that the Wehrmacht had lost the war. The strategic significance of the Battle of Kursk cannot be overstated. The battle ended with the Wehrmacht in full retreat, abandoning their positions in Ukraine and marking the beginning of a series of Soviet offensives that would push the Germans back to the gates of Berlin. The Red Army had achieved total operational superiority, and from this point on, the Soviet Union would dictate the terms of the war on the Eastern Front. The legacy of the Battle of Kursk. The Battle of Kursk stands as a testament to the resolve, bravery, and sacrifice of the Soviet people. It was not just a military victory but a symbolic one, showing the world that Nazi Germany's days were numbered. For the Soviet Union, the victory at Kursk was a turning point that paved the way for the eventual liberation of Eastern Europe and the final victory over Nazi Germany in 1945. The significance of the Battle of Kursk extends beyond the borders of Russia. It was a turning point in the global struggle against fascism, demonstrating that even the most powerful and technologically advanced military could be defeated by a determined and well-prepared opponent. The victory at Kursk is remembered not just as a triumph of arms but as a triumph of the human spirit, a reminder that the fight for freedom, justice, and peace is a cause worth every sacrifice. On this day, as we honor the heroes of Kursk, we reflect on the lessons of history and the enduring values that they fought for. The Battle of Kursk is a powerful reminder that in the face of tyranny and oppression, the courage and determination of ordinary people can change the course of history.